It was Joseph's birthday. The sunlight that morning felt gentler than usual. The air inside our tiny apartment was filled with the smell of pancakes and warm honey. I had woken up early just to surprise him. I held a small tray with a plate of his favorite breakfast and a cup of freshly brewed coffee. As I walked into the room, I found him sitting on the bed, rubbing his eyes like a child. "Happy birthday, love," I whispered as I placed the tray on his lap. He looked at me with that same warm smile I fell in love with 10 years ago. "Annie, you are the best gift life has ever given me," he said, and pulled me into his arms. We spent the morning laughing. We looked through old photos, watched silly videos we had taken years ago on cheap phones. We danced slowly to a song playing faintly from the radio. I made a small cake using whatever ingredients we had. We cut it together, and he fed me a piece with a chuckle. "This is the best cake in the world," he said. My heart was full. In that moment, I thought life was perfect. But perfection never lasts. Later that evening, we were in the living room. He had just stood up to open a small gift box I gave him. He looked surprised. Inside was a wristwatch, old and secondhand, but he adored it. He was just about to say something when he suddenly froze. His hands dropped. The box hit the floor. His body wobbled and then collapsed with a heavy thud. "Joseph, Joseph," I screamed. I knelt beside him. His eyes were open, but unseeing. His body twitched violently. Foam gathered at the corners of his lips. He was gasping, but no sound came. My voice broke as I called for help, but we had no one nearby. I grabbed my phone and dialed for an ambulance. "Please, someone help me. My husband, he just collapsed. I do not know what is happening. Please hurry." The minutes felt like hours. I held his head in my lap, stroking his hair, begging him to hold on. An ambulance arrived after what felt like eternity. They lifted him and placed an oxygen mask on his face. I sat beside him trembling, watching the lights above blur through my tears. My world had just shattered in a single second. The hospital corridor smelled like bleach and despair. As they wheeled Joseph into the emergency unit, I followed like a ghost. My hands were shaking. My feet felt numb. I was no longer sure if I was breathing. Nurses surrounded him. Machines beeped. Flashing lights and tubes and voices filled the room. Then someone stopped me. A nurse in blue scrubs held up her hand and said, "Please wait outside, Mum. We will do what we can." I sat in the hallway for what felt like years, alone, staring at the floor. Tears kept falling without permission. My fingers were locked together, praying even though I was not sure what I believed in anymore. My body cold from fear, my ears listening for footsteps. For news. Any news? Hours passed, and then a doctor finally approached. He was middle-aged with tired eyes. He stood in front of me and cleared his throat. "Ma'am, your husband is stable for now, but he is in a coma. We ran a full scan, and we found something." He paused like the words themselves were heavy. "Your husband has a rare degenerative condition. It has affected parts of his brain slowly over time. We believe he has known about this for quite a while." I blinked. "What? What are you saying?" "He never told me. He never said a word." "Are you sure?" "Yes," the doctor said. "It is very advanced. He must have hidden the symptoms. Sometimes patients do that to protect loved ones." I could not speak. My mouth was dry. My hands trembled harder. "Joseph, why did you hide this from me? How long have you been suffering alone?" The doctor continued, "We have to keep him under observation. There is a possible surgical procedure that may help, but it is highly risky and expensive." I asked how much. He wrote a number on a paper. My heart dropped. That was more than everything we ever owned combined. I took the paper with both hands. I nodded without understanding. I went to the restroom and cried into my sleeve. Then I washed my face and looked at myself in the mirror. I whispered to my reflection, "We will find a way. We always do." I walked back to the waiting area. I asked to see Joseph. He was unconscious, but peaceful, like he was sleeping. I sat beside his bed, held his hand, kissed his forehead, and said softly, "I will find the money, love. Just hold on." I left the hospital that night with an empty wallet and a heart heavier than anything I had ever carried. Outside, the wind was biting cold, but I barely noticed. My thoughts were drowning in fear. How could I raise that kind of money? How could I save him before it was too late? The next morning, I started selling everything we owned. I went back to our apartment, our little home that Joseph had painted blue. Because I said it felt like the sky, I walked from room to room, touching the walls, picking up memories, and putting them in boxes. I sold our TV, our fridge, our wedding rings, the bracelet my mother gave me, the painting Joseph made on our second anniversary, even the shoes he bought me last winter. People haggled. They paid less than it was worth, but I said nothing. I needed the cash, not the memories. When the house was empty, I stood in the middle of the living room, looking at the cracked ceiling, and I whispered, "I am sorry, Joseph, but your life is more important than these things." I called everyone I knew, friends, old colleagues, even people I had not spoken to in years. Some gave a little, some gave nothing. Some said, "I will pray for you." But prayers could not pay the hospital. I stood outside a bank for 3 hours, waiting for a loan officer who never came. I filled out forms, signed documents, and in the end, I was told, "Sorry, you do not have enough credit history. We cannot help you." I swallowed my pride and went to my uncle, a rich man with a cold heart. He looked at me with eyes that judged. He said, "What is the point of saving someone who is half gone?" I wanted to slap him, but instead, I walked away without saying a word. That night, I slept on a bench outside the hospital, curled up in my coat, holding a bag full of receipts and broken hope. I closed my eyes and dreamed of Joseph, alive, smiling, holding my hand. When I woke up, I ran inside to see him. He was still unconscious, machines still blinking, breathing still shallow. I sat beside him and whispered, "I am not giving up, even if the world turns its back. I will not leave you." Then I took the money I had gathered, every last coin, and walked to the billing counter. It was still far from enough, but it was all I had, and I prayed they would show mercy. I approached the front desk with trembling hands. The envelope in my hand felt too light, as if hope itself was slipping through my fingers. A young nurse sat behind the counter typing. She barely looked up. I cleared my throat and said, "Excuse me, this is all I have. Please, can you accept this for now? I will pay the rest in time. I will work, clean floors, do anything. Just do not stop his treatment." She glanced at the envelope, opened it, counted the money, then looked at her computer screen. She clicked something, waited, then sighed and said, "This is not even half. You will need to speak with the billing manager." I followed her gesture to a small glass office across the hall. A man sat inside. Grey suit, cold eyes. He looked at me like I was a problem, not a person. He did not invite me to sit, just leaned back and folded his arms. I explained everything. I told him about Joseph, his condition, his coma, our love, our struggles. I begged him to accept installments. "Please, sir," I said, "if you can just give us time. Joseph deserves a chance." I sold everything. "We have nothing left but this. Please." He paused, then without blinking said, "Hospital policy does not allow payment in installments for high-risk surgery. Either you pay the full amount up front, or we cannot proceed." My heart broke right there. I felt my knees weaken, but I refused to fall. I stood my ground and said, "Are you saying that because we are poor, you will let him die?" He said nothing. He just looked away and called someone on the intercom. Moments later, 2 nurses and a guard came to the room. The nurse said, "We will need to free the bed. We have other patients waiting. You will need to discharge your husband immediately." What? No. You cannot do this. He will die. He needs help. You are doctors. You took an oath. I shouted. I cried. I pleaded. But they did not care. To them, Joseph was just a bed, just a number, just a bill unpaid. They pushed his bed out of the ICU, unplugged the machines, took out the IV, and handed me a paper to sign. Refusal to continue treatment due to inability to pay. I stood frozen, my hands shaking, my soul collapsing. I signed it with tears streaming down my face. As they wheeled Joseph out into the hospital entrance, people looked. Some stared with pity. Some turned away. I held his hand and whispered, "I am so sorry. I failed you." Outside the hospital, the sky was grey. The wind was cruel, and the world looked away. They left us there, right at the steps. A bed with broken wheels, a man in a coma, and a woman with nothing but love and desperation. I stood beside Joseph, my arms wrapped around him, as if I could shield him from this cruel world. His body was still, his breathing shallow. I pulled my scarf off and covered him. His skin was cold, too cold. People walked past. Some glanced. No one stopped. No one asked. No one cared. I tried calling a friend, the one who came to our wedding, the one who once said, "If you ever need anything, I am here." She answered and said, "I am sorry, Annie. I have my own problems now." Then she hung up. I dialed another number, and another, and another. Most went unanswered. Some answered only to say, "I wish I could help." Then silence. Hours passed. The sky grew darker. I had no money for a taxi, no car, no strength. A kind older man who worked as a janitor came out from the back of the hospital. He saw us shivering. He approached slowly and said, "I saw what they did to you. It was wrong. Let me call someone." He called his niece, a nurse from another district. She arrived an hour later in an old van. She helped me lift Joseph into the back. With the janitor's help, she offered to take us to her small apartment. We drove through quiet streets. The nurse handed me a blanket. She said, "I do not have much, but you can stay a few days. At least he will have a roof." We arrived at her tiny flat. She had only one bedroom. She gave us the bed. She slept on the couch. Her name was Liza. She was kind, gentle, human. That night I sat beside Joseph, wiping his forehead, changing his clothes, talking to him softly. "Do you hear me, love? We are not in a hospital, but we are safe. Do not give up. I am right here. Please fight for me." He said nothing, but I believed he could hear me, so I stayed awake all night, holding his hand, hoping, praying. In the early hours of morning, as the city still slept, I whispered to him, "They think this is the end, but they are wrong. They will regret this. One day, they will remember your face." Days passed. Then a week. Joseph remained still. His chest rose and fell slowly. Every sound he made became a moment of hope. Every breath a prayer answered. I fed him with a spoon, cleaned his face, changed his clothes, talked to him day and night. I told him stories from our youth, about how he proposed in the rain, about how we got lost in the forest, and laughed until our stomachs hurt. I told him how much I loved him, how much I needed him to open his eyes again. And then one morning, he did. His fingers moved first, then his eyes fluttered, his lips parted, and I heard the faintest sound. "Annie." I froze. Tears flooded down my face. I leaned in and whispered, "I am here. I am here, love. You came back." He looked around. Then his face crumpled. "Where are we? Why am I not in the hospital?" I could not answer right away. My throat was tight, my heart broken all over again. They threw us out, Joseph. They said we could not pay. They disconnected everything. They made us leave. his eyes filled with pain, not just from illness, but from betrayal, from the weight of knowing that his life was measured in dollars. I tried to sit up, but he grabbed my hand. His grip was weak, but his eyes were strong. I am sorry, Annie. I should have told you about my illness. I did not want to ruin your joy. I thought maybe I had more time. I shook my head. No, do not say sorry. You are protecting me, but now I will protect you, no matter what it takes. He cried, and I cried, and Liza the nurse brought us warm tea. She smiled gently and said, "You two are stronger than most people I know." That night, Joseph slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, and I sat at the kitchen table with an old notebook in my lap. I began to write, not a journal, not a poem, but a testimony. I wrote everything, from the moment he collapsed, to the cold doctor, to the woman at the billing counter, to the moment we were pushed out into the street like trash. I wrote their names, their faces, their words, word by word, pain by pain. I posted it online, with one photo, Joseph in his hospital bed, eyes closed, machines unplugged, and me beside him, holding his hand. The caption was simple. They threw my husband away because we were poor, but we are still alive. I did not know what would happen next. I just knew the world needed to hear our truth. At first, there was silence. I refreshed the post 100 times that night. Maybe no one would care. Maybe we were just two invisible people in a world that only sees money. I closed my eyes beside Joseph, not expecting anything. But the next morning, everything changed. My phone buzzed non-stop. The post had been shared 10 times, then 50, then 1,000. By afternoon, it had reached 50,000 shares and hundreds of thousands of comments. People were outraged. They wrote things like, "This is inhuman. How can a hospital do this? Money should not decide who lives and dies." Others wrote, "Stay strong, Annie. Your story broke my heart. We are with you." Joseph could not sit up yet, but I read the comments to him. He cried. He kept repeating, "I cannot believe people care." After what we went through, news outlets started reaching out. A small blog featured our story, then a national paper, then a TV network called and asked if we could appear in an interview. I was scared, but I said yes. They sent a crew to Liza's apartment. We sat in front of a plain wall. Joseph wore a scarf to hide his weakness. I sat beside him and held his hand. The interviewer asked, "Annie, tell us what happened that night." I told everything, word for word. I did not cry. Not then. I wanted the world to feel the truth without needing tears. I spoke about how they pulled the plug, how they called security, how they told me my love was not worth saving because I did not have enough money. The video went viral in less than 24 hours. Millions watched. Millions cried. Some shared their own stories of being turned away, of being treated like garbage because they were poor. People began tagging the hospital. Their social media pages were flooded. Their ratings dropped. They turned off comments. But it was too late. The truth was out, and the world was listening. The next day, I received a message from a man in a suit. He claimed to be a legal advisor. He asked if I wanted to sue. I said no. I do not want money. I want justice. I want accountability. And above all, I want them to feel what we felt, to be stripped of their comfort, of their name, of their position, because they did not just fail us. They destroyed a part of us that we will never get back. The pressure was building. The hospital could no longer hide. News crews stood outside their gates. Protesters held signs with our names, pictures of Joseph lying on a gurney. Tears in my eyes as I begged the doctors. Those images haunted the public. People chanted outside, "Annie and Joseph deserve justice. Patients, not profits. Healthcare, not business." Employees tried to walk in and out, but were met with reporters. Questions flying. "Do you know what your hospital did? Why was he thrown out? Do you believe poor people should be left to die? The hospital released a statement. It was cold and filled with words like regret, unfortunate, standard protocol. We followed procedure, but the world was not buying it. Someone leaked internal documents, emails between staff, messages showing how they debated removing Joseph because his bill was overdue. They called him a case, not a human. They joked about who would push the bed out. They laughed at me, at my tears, at my voice breaking in the hallway. When I read those words, I felt sick. I showed Joseph. He went silent. Then he said, "They never saw us as real people, just numbers, just problems to solve with a signature." A well-known journalist picked up our case. He released an exposé, complete with names, photos, direct quotes, including the name of the doctor who told me there was no installment policy. Dr. Thomas Gray. The article revealed he had done this before. Turned away a pregnant woman who could not pay. Refused treatment to a child with pneumonia. People demanded answers. The hospital board held an emergency meeting. Under pressure, they suspended Dr. Gray and 2 nurses. The billing manager was placed under investigation, but the public was not satisfied. They wanted real change. They wanted them fired, and they wanted new laws to make sure no one ever suffered like we did again. Joseph looked at me and said, "This was never about revenge. This was about making sure our pain meant something, that no one else would be dragged into the street like trash because of a price tag." I nodded, but inside me, a storm was still raging, because even though they were starting to fall, I had seen the worst of them, and I would not stop until they were stripped of everything, like they stripped us of dignity. News of the hospital scandal spread to the national government. A senator publicly addressed our case. He held up a printed version of my original post and said, "This is why we need reform. This is why our health system is broken." Committees were formed. Health officials called in. For the first time, hospital administrators were no longer hiding behind polite smiles and polished shoes. They were answering questions, tough questions, about ethics, about human rights, about compassion. Dr. Thomas Gray appeared at a disciplinary hearing. He wore a suit, his hair neat, but his face was different, not arrogant, but cracked, shaking, sweating. I was allowed to speak. I stood in a room full of decision makers, beside Joseph, who sat in a wheelchair. We held hands. I took a deep breath, then spoke. "My name is Annie, and this is my husband Joseph. He was diagnosed with a rare illness. We had no money, and because of that, our hospital decided he did not deserve to live. They disconnected his machines. They rolled his bed out, and they left us on the street. Every word felt like a blade, but I kept speaking. You may think this is just one case, but I am here to tell you, there are thousands like us, who suffer quietly, who die silently, because they cannot afford to be saved." The room was still. One of the board members leaned forward and asked, "What do you want from this hearing, Annie?" I said, "I want accountability. I want consequences. But more than anything, I want change, real change, so that no hospital, no doctor, no nurse can ever again look at a dying person and ask, 'How much money do you have?' before they ask, 'How can I help?'" My voice trembled, but I stood tall. Joseph spoke next. He said, "I do not remember the moment they pulled the plug, but I remember waking up and seeing my wife broken, not from grief, but from humiliation. And I promised myself, if I ever walked again, I would walk into this room and speak these words. We are not just poor people. We are human beings." A long silence followed, then applause. Not loud, but honest. Real. A few days later, it was announced that Dr. Gray was terminated permanently. His license under review. The billing manager was removed. The hospital CEO resigned under public pressure. 3 nurses were suspended. and 2 fired. But it did not stop there. Lawmakers drafted a bill named after us, the Annie and Joseph Patient Protection Act. It required hospitals to provide emergency care, regardless of financial status. It gave families more rights. It banned forced discharge of unconscious patients. When we heard the news, Joseph cried. I held him and said, "They tried to erase you, but now your name is the name of change." Months passed. Joseph's body grew stronger. He began walking with support. Then without it, his voice returned, his laughter, his spirit. We moved into a small house gifted by a non-profit. It was nothing grand, just a quiet place with sunlight through the windows and space for him to paint again. His hands still shook, but he held the brush with pride, like a soldier holding a flag after a long war. Every morning we woke up and looked at each other with quiet gratitude. There were no riches, no luxuries, but there was peace, and we had earned it. On his next birthday, we made pancakes again. I lit a candle on a small slice of cake. Joseph smiled. "You remembered," he said. "I always will," I whispered. We danced slowly in the living room, the same room where he had once collapsed. But this time, he stood tall. We were not the same people. Pain had aged us, but it had also made us unbreakable. Our story continued to inspire. Schools taught it in social ethics class. Healthcare students studied it as a lesson on humanity, and the law named after us passed in full. It became a shield for the voiceless, and our name stood as its title. One day, I received an email from the hospital, not from a doctor, but from a secretary. It said, "On behalf of the former administration, we offer our deepest apologies for the suffering caused." I read it, then deleted it. Some wounds do not need apologies. They need to be remembered. A year later, I heard that Dr. Thomas Gray was working as a junior consultant overseas, stripped of his license, working in silence, far from the power he once had. And the nurse who had watched me cry with no emotion now worked in a small clinic, known only for treating colds and bruises. People sometimes ask me, "Do you forgive them?" I say, "Forgiveness is not forgetting, and I will never forget, but I do not wish them pain. I wish them realization, the kind that comes at night, when the lights are off, and silence reminds them of what they did. We never became rich, but we became powerful, not in money, but in truth. And now when I walk down the street, strangers stop me. They say, 'You are Annie. You are the woman who did not stay silent.' And I smile, not because I am proud of what happened, but because I survived it, and I turned it into something no one could ignore." Joseph paints every day now, mostly quiet things, mountains, sunsets, and sometimes a little hospital bed under a tree, with a woman holding a man's hand. I never ask him about it. I just sit beside him and hold his hand in return, because in the end, they tried to bury us, but they did not know we were seeds